So I thought I'd take the opportunity to show you how I'm going to frame my new canvas acrylic that I've done. It's a canvas board, so generally you'd put that onto a floating frame. Now you can either put it on top so it looks like it's floating, or you can, if you buy the correct size, put it underneath and have like this frame round it. Now just to explain, this part here is double-sided sticky tape. That's not actually going to do you a lot of good, if I'm being honest. So it's going to help, but it's not going to do you that much good. Generally the concept is to just lay that onto the key tape and it will grip this. But like I say, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So it's generally boards that end up on these sort of frames, and proper box canvases end up in box canvas frames. The one problem you have with something like this, unless you buy these specifically to go exactly to the aperture of the, or the measurements I should say, of the picture, is that you're going to have all this space left over. And how do you get this central? Well, I had a look and bought some spacers. In here, I mean, I've got, this is only half of the set. There's about, I think there's 60 or 72 in this set, and all of these spacers are different sizes. This is the thinnest one and this is the thickest one, and I use these spacers. I bought these off Amazon for $5.99 I believe, so that was rather good. Now what I would do first is to remove the double-sided tape. So let's go ahead and do that. That's not going to be the easiest thing in the world, because double-sided tape can be a bit of a nightmare, but it does have this edge on it, so you can hopefully just pull that off. So the theory is to just stick your board straight onto this double-sided tape and that's job done, but that's not going to work very well, to be perfectly honest with you. And it's not going to last too long either. The idea is there. So I use glue. What I've used is this PVA glue. Now I'm fortunate enough that my son works in this kind of industry, or he did at the time, and he had some of this left over. I've got a full bottle of PVA Bond here. So I am lucky enough to have this. Now what you need to do is to just put some glue around this edge, and then you lay on your picture and you let it set. But we need to adjust it. So what you would do is you'd get your spacers and put them in here. And I'll show you that as we go. I'm just putting on some PVA glue. Not too much, if I can get it out of the bottle. I mean, that's going to be more than enough really. You can even put it in little dots if you want. The only problem with doing the PVA glue, and I don't see it as a problem because once this is in the frame, it's going to be in the frame forever as far as I'm concerned. But if anybody bought it and ever wanted to put it in a different frame, is that they'd have to prise this off somehow, or prise the board off. Now if you've only got double-sided tape, it's likely to fall off anyway, so, but if you've got the PVA, that causes a little bit more of a problem. So I'm going to lay this on here very gently so that I can still manoeuvre it. I'm going to put it roughly where I think the exact widths of these would be, and I can do that by putting my fingers underneath the board and feeling just a little bit of the ridge there. And I would start with my biggest spacers, and I put as many of them in as I can, or as many of them in as I have, and I do exactly the same amount per side. I mean, I'm sure there are other things you could use apart from these spacers. So you just want to make sure that you get this all equal. That's as many black spacers as I have to put around the outside. Then I go on to the next size, and I'll put in a couple of them, and I can see that the width is getting narrower now. So I'll be looking towards putting in thinner spacers. But what you need is the equal quantity of each of the spacers around each side. Now that's going to work unless, and we'll see this in a minute because I've already tested it, you have a slightly unequal side, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm slipping all these in here, and you can see the board moves then, so it's obviously that it was too high, and we keep adding them in until such time as we've become very close to the edges. Now what you can do at this point is you can see if you can get any more in. Now I had one there, it moves the board over slightly, but if I can't get this other green one in here, then that's a problem, but I can. And that's as far as I can really go with that. So I need this there, in theory. But I don't think that a green one's going to go in here. It might go in one side, but it's not going to go in the other. So we're probably, half a millimetre out in the frame manufacturing. So I go down to the next size, which is the white, and I shove that one in. So at least I've got an equal amount on each side. Now these will help to keep your canvas in place. Of course you don't want it too tight. I've really made that as tight as I really need to go. But if you have it too tight, you're likely to scratch your edges, so be careful of that. I mean, one of the most important things is that I was telling my art group the other day is that you need to paint these edges no matter what, because these edges will detract from the look of your beautiful painting. So I've got an equal amount in this side and an equal amount in that side. The only difference is that this height is slightly different to this width in its thing here, in its width here. But that doesn't make any difference. And then you can do kind of a finger test to see how far you are away and make sure that each of these are equal. So in theory, all of this should now be equal, and I can now put a little bit of weight onto my board if I require it. So what I would do at this point is I would probably just put a book onto it and just let it rest. If I need to, I'll cover this picture up. I'll let you have a look once this is all dry, which will be a couple of hours probably, and I'll come back and show you exactly what it looks like after we've done. So in the meantime, get yourself some wedges of different widths off Amazon. If I remember, I'll put a link into the description. Make sure you've got equal amount on each of the widths if you can. If you haven't, make sure each end and each width is equal, and then just put some weight on there and let it dry. At that point you'll then put your fixings onto the back of your picture, but I'll show you all that in a second. But this is what they call a St Ives frame. It's a St Ives floater frame, slightly different to a normal floater frame, because a normal floater frame would not have this ridge underneath which lifts and elevates the picture away from the background and makes it look as if it's got a bit of a shadow and it's floating in the box, which I kind of have come across fairly recently and I really like. So we'll just let that dry. Now you've got it all wedged in, I'm just going to put a couple of books just to put a little bit of weight onto that so that it all dries properly and doesn't move. So I will see you afterwards and we'll see what this looks like, and then I'll show you how I put the fixings on. So I've now actually let this dry for a couple of days. what you do then is just take out your spacers, whatever spacers you put in, take them out and remove them, and there you go. It's all stuck to the base that's underneath it. Now it is possible that you can make a frame like this with an ordinary frame. The only difference would be that the gap here wouldn't be as big unless there was a way of you making this background the same as the actual frame. So you'd end up with just a very thin piece of space between the picture and the board, which is generally a lot of the time how these work anyway. It's just that I like this with this kind of format. So if you wanted to do that, you'd get an ordinary frame, get a backing board, either paint the... Look, we've got a visitor. Hello, Eddie. Hello, Eddie. Say hello. Anyway, you would get your frame, get a backing board. If you wanted this backing board to be the same colour as the frame, you could paint it, depending on what frame you've got. Obviously, if you've got a gold frame, you couldn't do that. And what you do on the backing board is you would put a raised surface underneath where your picture is going to be, and then you will attach the backing board to the frame, and then you'd have this raised surface. So in effect, all you'd end up with is this frame. So you can do that. You can do that with acrylic paintings. You can do that with canvas paintings, although there's probably a better way for canvases, because you'd go for a frame where you put the frame on top of the canvas. Now you can do it with paper paintings, watercolour paintings, but you must find a way of ensuring that they are varnished in some way. Now there is a way of varnishing watercolour paintings. I'll come on to that at another time. I have varnish for gouache paintings, or gouache, whatever you want to call it. I also have varnish for oil pastel paintings, which is a lot of what this channel's about. So if I wanted to do this with an oil pastel painting, I actually could. What I would have to do in that case would depend on what surface I'd actually painted the picture on. If I painted the picture on a paper, say for example, what I would have to do is find a board, a piece of hardboard, the same as what this would be, and attach my painting to that piece of hardboard. And I could either fold over the edges or I could make it exact. And I think PVA glue would be the best way of doing that again. And then I would varnish it, and then effectively all you'd end up with is what I've got here with my canvas varnished. And then you can use that to put on top of a box, or St Ives frame in this case. This is a floating frame, but slightly different to the normal floating frames because it's a bit posher and a bit more deluxe. St Ives frame, and they are, I wouldn't say they're the most expensive things in the world, but they're not cheap. So you can do this with any picture. Can't think of offhand of any pictures you couldn't do it with. I mean, of course, if you'd done your oil pastels on a board, say pastel mat board, that would make this even easier, wouldn't it? So there is ways of doing it. Now, once I've done this and glued this to the raised surface under there, it's all basically done now. But underneath, you'd end up with this hollow. Now, that is entirely up to you what you do with this hollow. You can put a board across here, but there's no need to. It seems like a pointless thing to do. But now, what you can do is you can put it on its front. And you're not going to hit this because this is raised up above that. And we now need to put the fixings on. Now, I used to work part-time in a framing shop, and this is how the guy who framed taught me how to do it. He said, obviously make sure your picture's the right way up, and then measure 1/3 of the length. You can put it into the middle here. So if I measure the middle and I come up with, well, let's do the length first. And I've got just about 39 centimetres. So if I said, or in inches, that would be 15 1/4. So if I said I would go to a third of that, and we'll call it 13 centimetres, it's as close as down it. So I'll make a mark there, okay, that's about 5 inches in fact, and then I'd measure the middle part here, which is 6.5 centimetres, so we'll call it 3.2 centimetres, which is approximately 1 1/4 inches. So we do the same there, and we do exactly the same on this side. So again, we measure 13 centimetres, and we measure the middle part, which is 3.2 in this case. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, the middle part here, but the length is very important, otherwise you could end up with a painting that's going to be on the squiff a bit. I just make an indentation in this case. I mean, I'm just using a take apart screwdriver, which is part of a tiny little set, you know, these little round sets that you get, or little square sets that you get, which just have a few of these in, a bit of this in, you know, just a little toolkit for well, my wife bought it for herself, so I'm going to say for ladies. And you get your fixings, which in this case there is only 2 hinges, 2 screws, and a piece of cord. And with your indentation, it makes it easy to screw in. If you didn't make the indentation, you'd be wobbling all over the place, and you wouldn't get a very good hold of the screw, especially on a harder wood. So I hold that between my fingers and start screwing, and just push that all the way in, because it does help to have the correct head. I wouldn't say this was perfect, but it's as near as damn it. And you just screw that all the way in. It gets harder the further you push in, obviously. And you just keep going. I mean, you can drill quite a deep pilot hole if you really wanted to, but there's no need to that. I don't want this wobbling about, so I keep going until such time as the screw stops, and then this won't wobble, and I'll keep that still. But I can still move it, look. And then I do exactly the same with the other part. Hold the screw steady until you get a bite. Right, now from there I want to attach my cord, and what I do is I half the cord by doubling it, so like that, okay, and from this end, this doubled end, I push it through the eyelet, ring, whatever you want to call it, and then I push this part of the cord through the loop that it's caused, and that way that's that part already done. I then make sure that these are nice and smooth along here and not doubled over, and then I push them through the other ring pull, and we end up with that. Now they're side by side. Now what I have to do is I have to pull some tension there, pull that way, and double it up underneath what I've already got. So in effect holding that tight. And from there I just make some knots. Probably a name for this knot, I'm not sure what it is. And just keep going. I mean, it is the first knot that you do in tying your shoe. So do several of them first knots. And you'll end up with a nice look to what you're doing. Nice and neat, nice and secure. Now the one thing we don't want to happen is for these knots to come undone. And once I've got a sufficient amount of knots, I usually do about 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm usually counting, but I'm talking 8, 9, 10. Now this is a nylon cord, so it can quite easily slip now, but we've got to find a way of stopping that. Now you could cut them off and put a little bit of tape around it, but I find a better way, and it's this. I snip the ends off about ½ inch from where they're going to be. Okay, and then I get a lighter or a match, whatever, but I've got this indoor lighter, and I melt by putting it close to that bit of nylon. It will sometimes set alight like it has now. You just let it go, don't let it go too far though. Now what has happened is that has melted the cord into the knots, so they're not going to go anywhere now. Probably see better from this side. In fact, let's zoom you in for this. So put the lighter near the cord. If it sets alight, just let it burn itself, but if not, just keep it close to it to melt. And it's melting the cord. And it's now set alight. Let it go, and then blow it out. Now that's melted into that cord and it's not going to go anywhere. You have to be careful when you're doing that, because if you put this too close, you can quite easily burn through this part here, and then you've got to start all over again. So be careful about that. Now there are additional things you can do once you've done your framing. You can put little felt tabs on the back of here. I do that for all my commissions, but for my personal work I don't normally do that. If I want it to look nice for somebody who's had a commission, then I will put these nice little tabs on the end. And that's basically it, done. So I can get a hold of that, and there you have it. Fully framed picture on a St Ives frame. And like I said, this is all the same if you were to make your own version of a St Ives or a floater frame. I think we'd probably call it more of a photo frame, because the St Ives frame has a bigger aperture. Anyway, I hope that was worth it, and just think you can do any paintings like this, and I quite like the effect of having this floating frame. It's different, isn't it? So it gives you something to have a try with, have a play with, see if you like it, and yeah, there we go. Anyway, until the next video, please have yourselves a great day, a great week, and a great year. And as always, be kind, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now. Hello. Hello. Yes, hello. There's your stuff here, look. Hey. Yeah. Hello. 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 Hello then. What are you doing, hey? What are you doing? Are you being a good boy? Hmm? Hey? You being a good boy? Yeah? Do you want your stuff? There you go. Here it is.